Good morning, Lauren, and good morning, Greg Barry from SDA Services. How are we all?
Morning. Thank you very much.
Excellent. So today is a really exciting episode, guys. We've got a bona fide expert, highly regarded industry professional giving some of his time. Anyone who does anything with SDA will probably know Greg Barry from SDA Services. He has an engaging little thing on his socials called Where's Greg? It's always good to see where he's been traveling to. So, Greg, I won't steal your thunder. Would you mind just introducing yourself and who you are, what you do, just so we're all caught up?
Yeah, sure. Well, thank you for this opportunity, David and Lauren. So I'm the founder and principal consultant at SDA Services, and we've been assisting NDIS participants who are eligible for SDA in achieving approvals for that and at aspired optimal levels for about 8 years now. So that's our story. Started in a room by myself 8 years ago. Approximately 20 wonderful colleagues now and well past 2,000 engagements in the space. So it's been a really privilege.
Congratulations.
People. It's a lot of people you've managed to sort of get determinations for, mate, to support it now. And look, at least from where I sit, and you and Lauren go back further than you and I do, Greg, but at least from where I sit, there's not many people out there that do what you do. And certainly not to the level and to the scope that you do. It must have been quite a journey. Firstly, as SDA is still, in my experience, not really well understood by a large part of the NDIS community. What's it been like growing from your room, as all businesses tend to start in a cupboard somewhere in a home, and then where you are, and just trying to get that message out? And I know that that's even changing, which we'll talk about shortly, but just trying to have people understand what it is you do, what SDA is, and how it impacts people.
So I've overarchingly, this has been a privilege, and it's part of what we perceive as our responsibilities to share some knowledge around the country about something that's really quite complicated. And it's easy and glib to say that it's complicated, but it really is. And I think that's the reason we've got a job. I guess that partly answers your question, David.
Can I'd just like to add in there, Greg, when we first met all the years back at, NDIS rollout day, I think we met at the RDN networks, the Redland Disability Network originally. And I could tell your passion for not only just the housing industry, but that specific pathway of making the housing actually accessible for people by gaining their SDA funding in their plan, which really is, well, back in 2018, 17, it was a new process, and it was something that nobody really knew how to do. And I remember we had so many conversations about what allied health assessments need to be in the plan. Whose responsibility is it to address the legislation? Is the OT doing that? Is the GP doing it? Is it the support coordinator? And I'm just so pleased you followed that path to not only use your intellect and your personal experience, but to also use your sort of legal history in addressing that legislation really thoroughly. And it is something I come back to all the time when I'm explaining to people why they should link in with you if they're looking for an SDA outcome, is because of your understanding of the legal system. I think your reports are so thorough that they really don't leave much room for, legal loopholes or, something not being addressed. The NDIS might slip through and give somebody a negative SDA outcome. So, yeah, I don't know whether there's a question in that, but I just wanted to comment on that because I really do think that makes you very different than a lot of perhaps support coordinators that are trying to address an SDA, legislative piece to get an outcome for somebody. It makes a big difference.
Yeah, thank you. It's a unique background, and obviously I'm not objective about it. But originally, legal practice more than 3 decades ago, and then becoming a father of a person with disability and necessarily working from home. And that's segued into producing property projects, and that's segued into Basel, Queensland, 50% of which was around the needs of people with disabilities.
Yeah.
There's no sort of plan around all of that, but it's with hindsight, I dropped in a place that really suited me when SDA came out.
Yeah. No, it seems to have been the right pathway for all of your combined knowledge across, property development, disability, legal, to really make use of those skills and have such a big impact on the industry.
Yeah, thank you. And I guess peers, without all being condescending, but relevant to your question, so other peers might come from different backgrounds, social workers, something like that. And I add that to our approach at Paranoia, that if we miss something, we see it was fails. So that's sort of as well to make sure that we're leave no stones unturned, matching that evidence.
Greg, with 2,000 determinations now, you've got a lot of experience. What do you see from where you sit? What are the driving influences that would give someone a good determination for SDA versus not? What sort of are the leading factors that would support a good determination?
You touched on it a bit, Lauren. There's definitely required evidence from medical professionals, and we definitely rely very heavily on occupational therapists. But also the process requires that the preferences and lived experience, the stories of participants needs to be elicited in a lot of detail. There's a provision in the NDIS Support for Participants rules that talks about what the CEO must consider for whether support might be effective and beneficial. It includes expert opinions, but also includes the second issue for that is the lived experience of participants and the carers that's enshrined in the legislation. So it's a non-therapeutic role to really get those stories out, and it starts with people understanding what their options are. From your organisation, familiar as we are, how broad the options are for types of places, types of dwellings, types of living arrangements. So having those conversations with people which informs them about those options, so they can then go and provide an informed articulation of their preference is a really big part of the process. Beyond the
and it's really, because we receive a lot of inquiries for people looking for accessible housing. Sometimes they don't understand what SDA is and how that really meets their need. And so we have this discussion about an application and about what their preference is for the type of accommodation they want to live in. And I think really outlining that early on and matching what their idea of an ideal housing situation is to an SDA outcome that would really meet their needs long term and help them engage with the community and help them get out and about and do more things independently. It's really important to know what their preference is from the get-go. And a lot of the people that we see come through haven't really had an opportunity to think that through very well previously, because there may not have been an option or it hasn't been something they've had to consider. So you're right. I think there's a king of the human preference and the story that sort of filters into the outcome that they want to get. And you guys are very good at doing that and making people feel very comfortable in sharing their experience to date so that you can use that to understand how it's going to benefit them having a better housing outcome. Yeah, it is. It is.
You're also quite quick. And as a property provider, we work with a lot of developers and owners and stuff who are, time is money, as they say, and when you're spending several $1 million on a project as a investor or developer, your time starts to matter at scale. And there's some evidence that sort of suggests that your process can shave months off a review like this or a determination application. What is it? What's the secret sauce, Greg, that has your organisation speed that process up for people? Because it's good for the participant and it's good for the owner and the investor. So what is it that has your process so quick?
I think it's myopic approach, the fact that we're just in this lane, and again with that.
Ooh, excellent, yeah.
Without condescension, support coordinators have a broad range of responsibility, whereas our focus is really narrow, and that gives us the luxury, I guess, of creating systems that are totally focused on this issue.
Greg?
Dave is constantly mentioning we want to be, what is it, David, an inch wide, a mile deep, instead of a mile wide, an inch deep. So, it's the jack of all trades versus the specialist. Whereas a support coordinator is more like your GP, where they've got a really, really important job, but it ranges quite significantly for a person with the amount of things that they have to know and coordinate and put to the NDIS on behalf of that person. It can really be a big load to carry. But you are able to go in there with those specialist staff, have a very, very efficient system to unpack that and apply to each individual, and collate that overall market data that you've been able to collect over the years to assess how this is actually impacting people long term, which is really important to feed back to the industry. And you've done some really, really great research pieces on that as well.
It's so good. I advocate regularly and loudly, Greg, that people should stay in their own lane and do what they're good at, and that then it forces collaboration. Now, collaboration can have its own challenges with timings and things like that. If you've got a problem you need to solve that has 4 constituent parts, you want four experts in those parts, and it'll happen quick. That's my view. It's when you try and be all things to all people that your organisation becomes big. It's unwieldy. It's slow. No one knows what they're doing because there's so many things to do. I love it. I didn't expect that response, mate. And I just think it's such a pragmatic and focused response. I'm really pleased to hear it. And it's something that we're also addressing at DHS is to sort of everything that's not core business of an SDA provider, let's just stop doing that, right? We're an SDA provider. That's what we're good at. That's what we do. If it's not that, it's noise. That's sort of how we're approaching things.
Makes sense.
Can I ask a pointed question? So recently, or not recently, it's sort of been a slow expectation change, and we saw it happen every sort of 2 years over the beginning of the rollout, is that support coordination funding has really started to diminish. So, back 2018-ish, we were seeing sort of $4,500 to $10,000 in a support coordination budget, depending on the complexity of the person per year. Reviews of that funding were reasonably easy to justify because the scheme was so complex and a support coordinator was there to help you unpack it and administer it. Since the review recommendations, and I believe the expectation there that support coordination is going to be changing to a navigator role with a different structure, what have you seen in terms of people coming to you looking for an application that don't have the support coordination funding in their plan, and how are you managing that?
Oh, well, it's really relevant to this year for us. Historically, we've been funded as registered providers of support coordination and specialist support coordination, as you know. Those buckets are shallow, but being negative, it's fact. It's always been a need for collaboration and diplomacy between ourselves and support coordinators to balance what they very justifiably need to do and our role being funded. That challenge has just got much, much harder. So the history was me being a bit lazy, cherishing our independence over those 7 years with the benefit of support coordination funding without reaching out to sector players as an alternative funder. We found we really just, in the context of the dynamic that I'm describing, we really needed to do something or stop doing what we do. So this year we put together a pitch, and the elements of it are, I guess, the dynamics context includes, when I first started doing this work, I didn't know anyone. So independence was even more necessary then. Now we know lots of people, we've got wonderful relationships and got a much better sense of who's. So in that context, we put out a pitch to people who we do know, who we really enjoy collaborating with, including your organisation.
Yeah.
To really address what you described a bit, David, which is we've got a problem, and the sector also has a problem about outcomes, the investment side of the sector, both as to reliability and timing. When I put together that pitch, I really hadn't analysed the timing issue as much, but it should have been more obvious to me. Outcome, 4, 5, 6 months earlier, more reliably than other averages. And if you've got $2 million buried in the ground, that really makes a difference.
Absolutely. It's a huge risk for a developer. And this is, we've seen it time and time again because we do sort of mini audits on our portfolio where if we know somebody's got an SDA determination, they've gone in with it, they've settled in, and there's a decline in their function or an expectation that perhaps they didn't get the right outcome to start with but needed housing, then a review needs to be conducted. And quite often I think that gets dropped once people move in. And developers are really the ones carrying that financial risk. They could be maximising income if the SDA determinations of the participants in their properties were correct. And so having that flick of the way that you're, interacting with the industry from solely NDIS funded to now having the option to explore as much NDIS funding as possible, but then to also work directly with developers to decrease that risk. I think it's a really great model and one that's really important to be able to keep getting participants SDA outcomes, which keeps the cycle of life going between investors coming into the market and developing good properties so that people can rent them. It's like the cycle of life, isn't it? Just an NDIS one.
I completely agree. And it should have been more obvious to me, as I said earlier, but, we both know from our experience, Owen, that the sector has never worked without, interaction between participants and people who support them and the investors. And they need to be, with the appropriate careful walls up between them, but there have to be those interactions. So this is just another manifestation of that. And we put some, very strong responsibility protocols into those arrangements in the MOU. So our responsibilities to the participant, irrespective of who's funding us, but it just has that potential and is sort of bridging that gap a bit that was starting to widen.
Yeah. No,
it begs the question then, if that, because it is a challenging environment as an investor, and all of the conversation out in the world, even in the Queensland context, you've got the Premier on TV saying more disability housing, hospitals are a problem, and SDA levels are there to encourage private investment, but there's so much uncertainty about the outcome at the end of the day. And if somebody moves in and you're expecting XYZ determination and it's one step lower, it's hundreds of dollars a week potentially as a difference. And that's not a small amount. If you built a house for, $1.5 million, a few $100 a week can be 30 grand over a year. It's not insignificant. And so that engagement timing, like what's, if I'm an investor, I want to build, 4 or 5 villas up at the north side of Brisbane or outside of Melbourne or whatever it might be, when should I come and approach someone like yourself about, hey, these are the people we're looking at, they need some reviews, what's good timing?
Some elements of the timing include engaging with an SDA provider, for example, organisations like yours, first, because we need a level of comfort in those relationships to know who's going to take responsibility ultimately if this aspiration comes to pass. So that's pretty important. My sort of romantic ideal, and I'm interested in your thoughts about this, is that places don't come out of the ground until there's some people in mind for them. So obviously, ideally, provider and some participants are in the conversation before that starts to happen. And then if we're asked about those participants and introduced to them at that stage, we can provide some reliable advice, hand on heart, that what the realistic expectation is, timing and outcome wise, and in that four-way conversation, good decisions can be made.
We see some developments more speculative. We see both, right? We see both where an organisation will come to us with participants in mind. Maybe they're a larger not-for-profit or a larger SIL provider who want to transition out of some SIL into SDA, and there's a family household ready to transition, or there's some people in mind, right? So that absolutely happens. And then there's more speculative investment where a larger developer or someone with deeper pockets might go, listen, I believe in that area, and we can provide advice on an area based on the information available from all the websites that have their levels of accuracy, plus what we see in the market. And we can overlay that. And then we provide some, not advice, but guidance about what we think of an ultimate density or makeup or household may look like in a year or two's time.
I confess that my view is somewhat skewed by all of the bad stuff that we've all seen, where decisions have been made to produce places in the wrong places that aren't appropriately designed, that haven't been informed by appropriate advice. So I admit my sensitivity for the process is skewed a bit like that. Obviously, if people get appropriate advice about demand and particularly what's good and bad amenity and design, some of those bad experiences that have really flagged to us, we use might produce these.
Yeah. And look, I think we've been on a similar trajectory in terms of collecting the information that we receive from people inquiring so that we can see the trends in the market and really understand what people want versus what they're getting, and try and improve the outcomes for people by working with the likes of yourself and working with developers before they build, to give that feedback and to sort of offer the industry our experience in a really transparent and non-opinionated way, where it's data that shows, our system at the moment. I was looking yesterday, majority of the, well, not majority, well, it was a majority, it was a pie chart, it was the biggest chunk. So I think it was accounted for about 35% of our inquiry, which was the biggest singular outcome, was approved at House 3 resident. Whereas if you compare that to a preferred living type, which we also collect, there is a huge preference. I think it was 42% preferred to live in single occupancy. So a huge disconnect between an SDA outcome that a vast majority of people are receiving versus how they want to live. And it's services like yours in the middle that can then try and address that for a person and approach the NDIA for a review of that SDA outcome. And I must say that your experience and outcomes with those reviews have historically been very good.
Yeah, thank you. And I guess what we're talking about sort of harks back to something about that narrow lane issue that you both responded to so positively before. In that narrow lane aggregate, we accumulate data, and as that data becomes a bit of a snowball, it becomes more compelling, and that really just aligns with what you just said, Lauren, as well. That over time we're all evolving in this space. Data rises to the surface, and really becomes very compelling for everyone's decisions.
And it's important to be able to make decisions based on that data rather than say so, which we've seen in the past. We've got marketeers saying that an area is in high demand and it's going to be a great investment, but without the data behind it, no one was able to justify that until the property sat there vacant for a long time, and the likes of a company like us would come along and be like, well, in actual fact, that's not what people want, and that's not where they want to live, and that's not the property type that they wish to live in either. So yeah, it's a big job getting the data, but we think it's really important to be able to educate and feedback to the industry to get better outcomes that are more aligned with participant choice and allow for things like reviews, like what you guys are doing.
Yeah. Now Greg, look, you guys are not a charity, neither are we. You're a commercial operator, fee for service, as are we, and you do great work, and you should be remunerated appropriately. And there's been changes to how that's been happening. And there's some flow-on effects to how you need to invoice time and then who to invoice time to for reports. Look, I suppose a bit of an open slather. What are your thoughts on the changes to funding, the opportunities you've made available for developers and support providers and things like that to participate in the process?
Well, first, most sort of important response, or most confident responses, I really just don't know. I don't know how this is going to sort of roll out, the navigator thing. I don't think relevant to what we do. One of the recommendations of the NDIS review is to have specialist home and living navigators, and that put a smile on my face because that's what we think we are. But we've heard nothing about the progress of, NDIS response to that recommendation. Yeah. The simplest answer is I don't know. If I have a sort of instinctive sense that if these jobs, particularly support coordination, becomes the responsibility of LACs, and I think there's no disrespect to those organisations, there's a bit of a detriment to that because support coordinators have a front-facing role, very responsible individual by individual, and I think the human-to-human aspect of that dynamic might, reduce. If if it's, a sort of let's put our hat in the ring for a quote sort of situation from a larger organisation. I think support coordinators do a wonderful job, and I'd hate to see them leave the room.
Yeah, me too. Yeah, I'm a huge advocate for them. The amount of administration knowledge that they have to help people actually get what they need to support them in the best way possible often is the difference between a very good situation and a very, very terrible one. And without that human interaction that often the support coordinators know the person and the families to a really high level to be able to understand what works for them and what doesn't, and what's a big risk in their life and what isn't. And so without that human-centered, really interactive role, I do worry about the outcomes people will be able to achieve under a sort of bigger umbrella program like the Navigators.
And I agree, Lauren, and obviously, and one of the other contexts historically is, and I can remember support coordinators used to walk into NDIS offices and sit down with planners. Well, they were good old days, weren't they? So the human-to-human interactions between the agency and participants have reduced enormously over that sort of period of history. So reduced interactions with support coordinators were, just a worsening negative trend.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree. Can I just circle back? Sorry, it was on my mind before and I forgot to ask it. You mentioned before that, and we were talking about when is it important for SDA service to be part of the conversation for the participants' SDA outcomes. And this is where I think your new sort of service delivery model really is going to benefit a lot of people that are already actively in the market, is when we've got an investor or a development group that have already built a property and there's a SDA manager in place and there's some SDA outcomes there that might not be optimal. And we've seen quite a lot of those developers sort of come to us for advice on what they can do. And I think it's a really interesting sort of switch of the mentality of, that's an NDIS funded issue and comes back again to available support coordination funding. Now being able to flip that back to the developer and say, okay, there's an opportunity here for tenant A, B, and C of a complex that's perhaps got 8 people in there to have tweaks to their SDA outcome that would suit their needs better and be appropriately funded for the accommodation that they're in and that they plan to stay in long term. So are you seeing some interest from developers looking at that audit of their current to address any sort of optimization that you can do there?
We certainly see that impetus, not as sophisticated as an audit type atmosphere, but I wouldn't be surprised if things evolve that way. Our contribution to those conversations is, as part of our sort of getting our foot in the door, is to provide an assessment of what we think the likely outcome for an individual might be to revisit it, and we do that pro bono. And we think that's an efficient way for us to enter the room, to put our reputation somewhat on the line, to say this is what we think the outcome's going to be. That can inform decisions, which include decisions about the security of tenure for a person or whether a person might move in. So we just think there's been wins in those relationships if they're carefully managed.
Yeah. And look, we've worked on a couple of these together where we might have had somebody living in an apartment that has villa funding, and that's been an example we've both crossed paths on. And happily, that person is now approved for the correct funding type that she's living in after a significant amount of reviews and appeals through your team. So that kind of approach, I think, really can change somebody's security in a property where, if there was a $30,000 gap and you're in a high demand area, eventually the investor might sort of go, listen, are you actually doing a review of that SDA to be able to stay here long term, or should I be considering perhaps not looking at a renewal of your lease whenever it comes to term? So it can really improve the security of tenure for tenants, and it can also improve the security of tenure for the investor as well. So it's very important.
Yeah, that quick assessment you do, Greg, that as you describe, you do a quick assessment pro bono, and it's based on some significant experience. You're not just throwing darts in a dark room. You've got some experience to back it. Firstly, how long does it take you to do that quick assessment? And then are you generally correct? Like, what's your strike rate on outcomes versus that quick assessment?
Question. So in terms of the length of time it takes us to do that, it's really reading and talking. And we can get on top of that in an hour to 2 hours of reading and talking. And we've got, materials that standardly articulate those assessments there. So an hour to 2 hours. In terms of outcomes, really, how do I put this? In the first instance applications, we see 70% of people get what they aspired for and what we agreed to collaborate with them on. The second stage is Section 100 reviews, the internal review processes, approximately 63% success. So we've gone from 30% of people to 35%, sorry, 34% of people still in at the AAT and ART level historically, and acknowledging that we're not there for the whole journey because we can't understand. But for people who we supported to commence that journey and been involved in that, we've seen a 100% success.
That's amazing. That's a really good outcome, and it is something that we've been keeping an eye on. Is how are these being responded to in the ART? And I've always suggested that if somebody's used your services from the get go, so from day one, your report is really foolproof. It's very thorough. It addresses every piece of the legislation, and I know it really well. And what that does is set a participant up for if they do end up all the way down the line through a review of the decision and then in the ART, your original report stands up in an ART case very well. There's often only a little bit more justification that they might require, and if it's 99 times out of 100, or I think what is the conversion 1,999 out of 2,000 has been successful in the ART, then it really, your report's standing the test of time, and your process too.
Really good. So if you're an investor or a developer listening and you're sort of wondering how to do it, that's for a couple of hours of your time back of office. It might cost SDA Services a couple of $100 in staff time, but you get a pretty accurate, not even a guesstimate, a pretty accurate analysis of where the determination will land for that participant. It's real, Greg. Mate, I'm a big fan of what you do. I'm a big fan of how you do it. I love that you engage with all people equally. You're not captured by anybody, which is really great. I love that there's no sacred cows and we can have really open conversations. It's great. And look, and we're striving to honor those kind of values as well. And I think if, as an industry, if all the different stakeholders and collaborators really just kind of stepped back and took a breath and got, you know what, we can all work together. There's plenty of work and there's plenty of people that need different levels of support by different stakeholders. We're all here together. And part of what I respect about what you do is that you do that. We're engaging now on an EOI response, and you were very clear in our meeting that, this doesn't bind me to you in any commercial way. Well, perfect. That's great, right? It's really clear. You operate with integrity. Look, DHS, we're a big fan of SDA Services. Can't recommend you enough. If you're another SDA provider, if you're a support coordinator, if you're a developer, if you're an investor, Greg Barry and his team, SDA Services, based in Southeast Queensland, and a really horrible spot near a marina. It sucks. It's terrible out there, Greg. I don't know why you
to visit. Terrible.
Yeah. Look, is there anything else you'd like to touch on before we wrap up the episode, Greg?
Yes, when you said that, I'm delighted to hear those words. Thank you, Ivan. It's all underpinned by the fantastic outcomes that we all see. We wouldn't be doing this unless we see that, daily. And this can be a rocky road for all contributors. You see the fantastic outcomes. That hypothesis started back when I met you, Lauren, and it's turned out correct, and it keeps us all going, doesn't it?
I've loved tracking the reduction in support costs the longer somebody's in an SDA. It's actually really, really great to see. I'm so glad you guys are keeping your finger on that pulse, because that is, and I always take it back to why did the NDIS create this SDA component of the scheme? And it was to help people become more independent and to build their capacity in the home that they live in whilst feeling safe about their, security of tenure. And it really does feed back to that. The investors are invited to the market. You're there to help, make sure that the investment is financially sound. And we're there to join all the pieces together in the middle. That's what we feel like we do anyway. So yeah, it is a good outcome. Yeah.
All right, guys. Well, I think that'll see us out. Greg, thank you for cutting some time out of your day to have a chat with us, mate. We'll get these stitched together and edited and uploaded and share it with you as soon as we can. Lauren, thanks again for the level of expertise that you bring that I don't always have in these tricky questions that you know how to frame up. So thanks very much, guys. It's been a great episode.
Thank you.
Both.